Got to make sure my mic is turned on. All right, here we go. So uncertain times. Why do we call these uncertain times? Really because, as I mentioned to you in the beginning in the intro, I said, so Christmas kind of leads us, and we've been celebrating Christmas now for almost 2,000 years. And so when we get into that place, we're like, all right, Christmas, there's the certainty of it, God with us, right? Emmanuel, God with us. There's that part. We've celebrated the birth of Jesus. We're still in the midst of the Christmas season. And yet there's the new year that's kind of uncertain. Now, why do we call it uncertain? Because anything that's unknown is usually uncertain. And we don't know what 2025 will bring. And there's often times when we're looking at that and thinking about what it is to come. There's lots of changes that could happen in 2025. There's lots of things that could happen. And so what do? In our mind, we're already racing to it. We're like, this is what's going to happen. We don't even know. But in that uncertainty, we try to make it more certain. We want to know what it is that's going to happen. We want to know what it is, what we can prepare for. We want to know. But in that unknowing, in that uncertainty, we fill it in with fear. And we're like, but here's the thing that I want you to be able to keep in mind today, is that we balance it with certainty, God with us, even into the uncertain, even into what we do not yet know. And this is the reason why when we're thinking about a new year, New Year's always bring about these reflection moments for us. We reflect on what was. We reflect back on 2024. We look back at the year and we say, here's some good, here's some bad. And then we'd also filled with anticipation. We're looking at this, what are we waiting for? What are the things we would like to be able to see happen? And so we have this reflection moments we're thinking about, and we're being able to say, all right, I don't know what it's going to bring, but this is what I hope to be able to see. And so this past year, we've probably gone through some moments of burdens. We've gone through the blessings and the burdens, right? We've had some good things. Maybe we've had some bad things. Usually this is the way that life goes. We're mixed with both the good and the bad. We're mixed with the triumphs and the trials, the blessings and the burdens, and we try to balance things out. And sometimes, usually when we get to the end of the year, we either say, hey, good year, bad year. But based on what? Usually it's whatever the highlight was. Was the highlight the blessing? Was the highlight the triumph? And so therefore we can say at the end of the year, yeah, good year. Or was the burdens and the trials so much that that's the thing that you're focusing on at the end of the year and saying, not so good? You see, there's a lot of things that occurred in the world in 2024. There was a lot of things that happened. You see, we can spend our time living in that kind of moments of the past and living in either the blessing or the burden or the triumph or the trials. We can live there, or we can say, God, we are anticipating with hope God with us. That even in the uncertainty of 2025, we can say, God, you're with us. And this is the blessing that we have. As followers of Jesus, as we enter into uncertainty, we say that there are still some things that we are building on. There are still things that we have a structure that carries us into uncertainty, into the unknown, that we can still rely on. So how do we navigate with hope and purpose? You know, we talk a lot about hope in the Advent season. Advent, one of the words that we focused on was hope. We said we're going to have some hope. We've got some hope. Why? Because Jesus. And you see that hope, God with us, Jesus, that brings us a lot of hope. We talked about purpose on Christmas Eve. We said, just like those angels that came to the shepherds, and the shepherds were those that were kind of like outcasts in society. They weren't trusted people, and yet God gave them a purpose. He said, go and carry this message. It's a message of joy. It's a message of peace. Go. And guess what? These shepherds didn't wait. They went and saw where Jesus was born. And they went back to their hometowns. They went back to their houses. They went back to their families. They went back to their friends and they said, do you know what we just saw? You see, there's purpose. You see, God also gives you and me a purpose. You see, there's the moments when God carries this message and brings it to you. We can say, you know, like, hey, this is good to hear, and then just keep it. Or we can share that same hope, purpose, peace, and love with those around us. So how do we do this? This is where we're going to jump into our text today. As I mentioned, this is the only place where we're going to be. We're going to kind of just walk through the text a little bit here today. And so we're going to be in Colossians chapter 3, 12 through 17. So Paul is writing to the church in Colossae, right? That's Colossians. And Colossae is a place that didn't have, like, it wasn't a problem church like the Corinth church. They were a problem church. They were a problem people. Why? Because Paul had to write 2 letters to them to be able to make sure that he was highlighting everything that was wrong. And there were some things that might have been right, but for the most part, he was trying to be able to say there's something wrong here. But Colossae, the church is there. Paul's writing to them and trying to be able to bring to them a different message, which is the reason why when we hear this message today, in the midst of uncertainty and unknown, we hear these words, we receive these words, and we say, God, tell us what to do with it. So verse 12, we're going to start there. Since God chose you to be the holy people that he loves. Right, we're just going to stop there for a moment because that's the first part. Right, this is it, right? Remember who you are. Who are you? This is an identity statement that Paul's bringing us into. He's like, don't go into uncertainty not knowing who you are. Because if you don't know who you are in the midst of everything else being uncertain, guess what? Fear's going to take over. Fear's going to try to tell you who you are. Fear's going to say, oh, you don't really have an identity. You don't belong anywhere. You don't belong to anybody. You see, fear's going to allow us not to be able to focus in on who God has called us to be. It says, you know what, like everything is uncertain. I don't even know who I am. I don't know who I belong to. And so we march forward in that same uncertainty, not just into the uncertain future, but also the uncertainty of who we are. So what does Paul say? God chose you to be the holy people that he loves. God chose you to be a holy people that he loves. You see, there's an identity. When we're lost, when we're distracted, when we've lost sight of who we are and who God has called us to be, we look at something very simple like this, and Paul says, you are the people God chose. You are a chosen people, holy and loved. And this is the reason why when we move into uncertainty, the more that we know who we are, the more that we hold on to that identity, the less uncertain everything else is going to be able to shake us into. We can't let our identity and who we are shift like the shifting sands, like the shifting messages, the shifting leaders. When everything shifts, we can say, oh, I need to make myself into this. I need to make myself into this. I've got to find a way to be able to blend in here, to be able to do this over here. And then all of a sudden what happens when we're taking on all of these different identities? Then we're losing sight of who we are. So when God says you are a chosen people, we say we, the God of the universe, has called us. He's chosen us. And I don't know if you remember, I don't even know if this happens on the playground anymore, but usually there's teams or sides and people get picked. Did anybody ever get picked last? I don't know if you want to raise your hand on that, right? So there were some people that got picked last. I guess it all depended on what it was, right? And usually on the playground, you're usually playing like some sort of game, right? Some sort of sport, whether it's kickball, football, basketball, whatever it is that it might be. And so there are some people who are like, no, I always get picked first. And some people are like, yeah, I never got picked first. I was always down on the bottom. You see, this is where a lot of times those people who are down on the bottom are always being able to say, I know that I'm not that. I'm not a kickball player. I'm not a basketball player. I'm not a football player. I'm not that. Guess what? You know who you are. It's okay. You see, when you know who you are, it doesn't matter. You're like, you know what, I don't care if I'm picked first in kickball because it doesn't matter to me. I know who I am. You see, the identity matters. Because when you know who you are, it doesn't matter when you get picked. God chose you. God didn't wait in order for you to say God's going to pick out all the good ones first. He's going to pick out all the really special ones first. God's going to be able to use I'm going to take this little group first because the rest of them I'm going to see what kind of shifts out of this whole thing called life and figure out if they can get it or not. They're not going to say God's not waiting on you to become holy. God's going to make you holy. God didn't wait to choose you. God already chose you even before you were born. You're God's people. Chosen, holy, loved. This is where it starts. Identity matters. Remember who you are. 2, Paul gets into, all right, now what does this look like, chosen people? What does this look like? God chose you. God says he's going to make you holy. And so then Paul continues, so you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Look at these. These are the ones, right? These are the ones that everybody wants to pick, right? Everybody wants to pick humility and patience. Everybody really lifts up the qualities that are given here in the world today, right? With tender-hearted mercy, kindness, and humility. You see, what's would be really great is that if we had leaders in our nation, in our world, who would be able to clothe themselves with these kind of characteristics. What would it look like? What would it really look like if somebody was trying to embody this? And we can look at it this way. We can say, what does it look like for them first? Right? Like you say, hey, what would it look like for people who have the eye of all people on them? What would it look like for them to be able to take on mercy and kindness and humility and patience? That would be lovely. But we don't get to see it all the time. Sometimes we get a glimpse. Sometimes we get a piece here, there, and we're like, oh, look, wait. Because what happens to these qualities? What happens is that when we look at this, we say, oh no, see, mercy is what's going to get you trampled. Humility is what people are going to run over. Because this isn't power. Power doesn't mean humility and kindness and gentleness and patience. No, power is going to mean that you are pushing in, that you are making your way to the top, that you're trying to be number one. You see, this is why Jesus, when he embodies something that actually is very countercultural, it's different than the way that the world is going to be able to look. And this is what he wants for his chosen people, to be able to take on this kind of thing. So he says, clothe yourself. And I love the way that Paul uses this image of clothing yourself, because there's things that we need to be able to put on. There are things that we need to be able to embody. What does mercy look like? Mercy means that you're not going to give people what they deserve. Somebody who has done something wrong, and we say, oh, here's the penalty, we're going to carry that out, and this is what happens to you. You're done. Mercy is the thing that people cry out when they've come before a judge, when they've come before people, right, that are trying to be able to lob accusations and things like that, and they say, have mercy on me. Do not give me what I deserve. I deserve punishment. But don't give that to me. Have mercy. You see, God had mercy on us. God had mercy on you and me when we were still enemies of God, when we were far from God, when we were living in a way that was not godly. God did not say, okay, now you're done. Now I'm going to give you this right punishment. Instead, he gave us something that we didn't deserve. His grace. His forgiveness. You see, this is the reason why when he's like, put on mercy. Because if we're trying to carry out all the punishment of the entire world, guess what what happens to us in that? We become self-righteous. And when we become self-righteous, that means we no longer need God's righteousness. We're saying, God, you step out of here. Let me take the role of the judge. That never works out. And so we clothe ourselves with mercy. We clothe ourselves with kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Guess what? Where are all these found? These are the fruit of the Spirit. And it's just a little slice of them. because we're going to get to another one here in the next point. But here's the thing. When we're taking on all of these fruits of the Spirit, God's already saying, you've got them. Because when you were baptized, God gave you all of these fruits of the Spirit. He said, these things are already in you. Now, what do you need to do with them? Equip them. Put them on. Don't just say, and I've used this all the time, right? Don't just say, "Really, I'm just impatient. I really don't like patience. I like to move into things that I want to do, and I want to be able to see it get done. I don't want to have patience." But God's like, hey, do you know you already got that in you? Put it on. Use it. Embody it. So what do we wait for? We wait to be able to see God with us. We wait to be able to see, where can I use gentleness and kindness and humility in the relationships with people around me? You see, when we start to embody these are the things that people will also be able to gravitate towards, because they don't get to see this most of the time in the world today. They don't get to see mercy and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. And so when we embody it, when we start to be able to take it on and put it on and say, this is the way that God has called us to be as His chosen people who are holy and loved, then we say, this is what it looks like in the world today. But we also don't stop there. As I mentioned to you, we got another fruit of the Spirit. Verse 14, above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. You see, Paul likes to talk about love. You remember Corinthians? I mentioned to them the Corinth church. 1 Corinthians 13, we often use that passage. This is the love chapter, right? And it's the love chapter. We use this at weddings. We use this at anniversaries, right? Talking about this love that doesn't keep a record of wrongs. It's a love that perseveres. Right? And then at the end of this whole passage, the love chapter, what does it say at the end? He's like, if I had all the other gifts, if I had the gift of tongues and I have the gift of administration, I had all these gifts, and I didn't have love, it would be nothing. Paul talks about this love that binds. It's a love that brings us together, right? Because he's saying this is going to happen in community, in relationship. And when love comes together and binds all these things, it brings us to a better sense of what mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, and all the rest of the fruit of the Spirit means in our lives. It binds it all together and says, love means I'm going to forgive. Love means that I'm not going to be able to look at a fellow brother or sister in Christ and be able to say, now I'm going to put these restrictions on, and I need to be able to judge you, and I need to be able to hold you all to this same standard that I'm trying to match. Love makes room. It makes room for faults. It makes room for mistakes. When we don't say the kind word, when we don't choose mercy, when we're not patient, love can still bind us together. So this highest virtue, the virtues of all those fruits of the Spirit. These are the highest virtue, but the highest of those is love. Love bridges gaps between things, and it heals wounds between people. But it also brings us to that greater sense of unity. We would love to be unified. Paul uses the word harmony. Harmonious. You see, when the harmony is sung, right, there's a sense of beauty to it. There's a part that when the community and relationships, when we're working together, all for God's glory, all to His good, right? When we're working together, there's something that's so beautiful about it. Because it brings us all together. Next point. Verse 15, let the peace rule in your heart. Verse 15, and let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts. For members of one body you are called to live in peace and always be thankful. Right? So the peace that comes from Christ. Fear and anxiety seems like it's the opposite of peace, right? Because peace seems like calm. But the unknown that leads to fear and anxiety and worries, like it seems like it's on this side, right? Peace is calm and everything else seems to be really troubled waters. Like it seems to be real, like it's fear. Everything's over here and you're like, everything's kind of muddied. Everything's kind of, it's really hard to be able to think clearly, to be able to see clearly. And then you think about peace, and peace is the thing that gives us that calm. So what does this thing remind you of? It reminds me of Jesus and the disciples, right? They're out on the boat. They're on troubled waters. Water is starting to be taken into the boat. The disciples themselves, they're freaking out. They're like, I don't know what's going to happen. I think we're going to die. And they believe in their heart that they are going to die. And then they say, Jesus, where's Jesus? Wait, he's the captain. Like, why isn't he standing out front, like yelling out orders, telling us what to do? And where do they find Jesus? He's asleep. You see, Jesus embodies peace. Because even though the rest of the boat seems like everything is wrong and everything is going to go wrong and this whole boat is going to be under and we're all going to die, and they wake Jesus up and he's like, what's wrong? Why do you have such little faith? You really thought the boat was going to go down? Now is not my time. You see, Jesus is trying to be able to, and as he says there, he says to the wind and the waves, he says, be calm, be still. And it all dies down. Right? Jesus has control over the wind and the waves. But is Jesus trying to be able to say, hey, you should be terrified of the wind and the waves, and I'm going to make it stop every time that there's trouble? No. Jesus wants you to have peace in the midst of the wind and the waves. Jesus is trying to teach that to his disciples. Jesus taught it to Paul here because Paul has gone through all kinds of different stuff in his life, has gone through the difficult situations, the boat crashes, the imprisonments, the beatings. He's gone through all of that, and yet Paul is still teaching to the Colossian church and to us today, peace. Be calm in the midst of the trial, in the midst of the wind and the waves, in the midst of, I think I'm going to die. This peace comes from Christ. do we believe that the future is already in God's hands? 2025, we don't know what's going to happen. Do we believe that God has already been there? You see, God is in our yesterdays, our todays, and He's also in our tomorrows. You see, this is the thing about being God. God is not constrained by space and time. And this is the reason why God is already in our tomorrows. God is already there. God already knows. And so this is the part that brings us a little bit more of that peace when we know that God's already there. Then when we move into the unknown, we're saying, nope, God, you're already here. You already know what's going to happen. You're already telling me to have peace now so that I can prepare for tomorrow. This peace should rule our hearts. Jesus brings it to us and He says, let it rest on you, even in the midst of the uncertain. All right, move to verse 16. Verse 16, let the message of Christ in all of its richness fill your lives. Teach and counsel each other with all wisdom that He brings. Sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts. So what do? We dwell, right? We abide in the Word and in relationship with one another. Christianity is not to be practiced alone. We can say, hey, I can worship God on a mountain. Absolutely, you certainly can. God's up on the mountain too. Remember, no constraints on space and time. God's there too, right? You can worship God on a lake. Absolutely. But when you fail to be able to bring in God's chosen people who are holy and loved, you're trying to do it on your own. Jesus never meant for you to do this on your own. And so we dwell in the Word, we abide in this Word, but we also dwell and abide in relationships with one another. Because it's in that shaky ground that we also find those disciples that were in the boat with Jesus, they still had one another. They still were able to look at the other disciple sitting next to them and saying, you're terrified? So am I. We're in the same boat together. You see, this is a wonderful part about being in relationship and community. When you are terrified, you can look to the people next to you and you can say, hey, I don't know if you're terrified or not, but I am. Help me. It's good to be with people because it brings some of that stability into the nature of the shaky ground. On shaky ground, we need to find stability. And where do we find stability? It's in the Word and it's in people who are there to be able to help us. All right, then finally, we go to 6. Do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, which is verse 17. And wherever you do, or whatever you say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through Him to God the Father. Right? So you are a representative. You are an ambassador. You know what the ambassadors do? We have ambassadors to every nation in the world. And what is the ambassador's role? Is the ambassador's role to be able to make rules and laws that are going to apply to those nations? No, it's not their job. Their job is to be able to go and to represent the United States in those nations. To be able to embody the things that our nation should be upheld for. You see, and this is the reason why when Paul's talking about being a representative, he's saying you are a representative of Jesus. The same Jesus who lived, died, and rose again, you are a representative of Jesus. This takes us back and kind of brings the whole thing full circle, because he says, now you're going to embody everything that Jesus said and did. You are going to bring this into your relationships with others, into the entire world. And when we embody all of these things, we're taking on the nature of Jesus. We're being little Jesuses to the entire world. This is a good thing for us, because this gives us a sense of purpose, and it gives us a sense of an eternal mindset. Because the purpose says, like, I know that I'm a representative. Why? I'm a representative because I've been chosen by God. I'm holy and I'm dearly loved. God has brought me into this family. He has said, you now are going to represent me in the world. Purpose. When things are shaky, when somebody is coming to you and in fear and in anxiety and all those worries filled with the things that are unknown, then we speak into it. We say, let me give you some hope in this. That even in the midst of the unknown, we have a purpose and we have a reason. We have a God with us that's given us all kinds of things to be able to be stable in an unstable world. So we embody it. We clothe ourselves with it. And we walk into 2025 with hope. It says God's already there. And so we give him our lives, and we say, show us the way. In Jesus' name. Please stand and pray with me.